Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a really fascinating trip back to the heart of London. We're looking at Westminster Chapel.
Right, a place that was much more than just, a church building.
Exactly. It was this physical and spiritual monument to British nonconformity.
Yeah.
And its story, well, it's one of a pretty dramatic transformation.
Almost violent, you could say, in institutional terms.
Yeah. We're tracking its history, starting from its roots as this highly structured, very socially engaged hub of congregationalism, and seeing how it became, quite remarkably, a teaching center built almost entirely around the vision, the personality of one man, Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones, since the mid-20th century.
And, for you to really grasp how radical that shift was, you've got to understand what it was before. It's foundational identity.
Okay.
For over a century, right up until 1967, Westminster Chapel was, the definition of a congregational church.
Yeah.
Deeply tied into the Congregational Union of England and Wales, the CUEW.
Right.
Its whole institutional history, it really mirrored the ups and downs of that denomination.
So what did those fortunes look like? What was the trajectory?
Well, it's a story of a huge rise and then a pretty steady decline, actually. Congregationalism was incredibly influential in the 19th century.
Yeah.
It hit its absolute peak, just in terms of sheer numbers. In 1904, they had something like 4,615 churches across England and Wales.
Wow, that many.
Yeah, huge. But then, by the time Lloyd-Jones resigned in the late 60s, well, that number had basically halved, down to just 2,386 churches by 69.
So Westminster Chapel was kind of riding that wave up and then down.
Exactly, operating right at the center of that growth and eventually the contraction.
And when you called it a monument earlier, you weren't kidding about the scale, were you? The building itself says a lot.
Oh, absolutely. The chapel was founded by these really powerful, influential laymen, people like Thomas and Joshua Wilson. They had this staggering vision for chapel building.
Right.
The original building back in 1841, it already seated 1,500 people.
1,500 seats. In central London in the 1840s. That's enormous.
It is. But, they didn't stop there, that first building.
Right.
Replaced in 1865.
But something even bigger.
Oh, yeah. Designed by W.F. Poulton, seating a staggering 3,000 people.
3,000.
Yeah. And it was described, our research found this, as looking almost like a Victorian music hall. And get this detail.
Okay.
The span of its roof was apparently greater than any other edifice in London except Covent Garden Theatre.
Wow. Okay, so rivaling Covent Garden's roof span. That's not just a church. That's a massive statement.
It absolutely is. It was nonconformity saying, we belong, we're respectable, we're major players, built to impress the world.
Though, as we'll get to, Lloyd-Jones had some different views on that kind of respectability.
He certainly did. He called it a carnal spirit.
Right. So here's the core question for this deep dive then.
Yeah.
How did this huge, architecturally impressive, historically significant institutional center, the heart of a denomination, manage to basically dismantle its entire social structure and turn into what some called, virtually a one-man preaching center, all in just a few years?
It's quite the story.
So we need to look at what was there before, what was ripped out. Let's start with those early ministers.
Okay. If you rewind right back to the beginning, you immediately see this deep commitment to the local area to social action. The very first minister, Samuel Martin.
Right, 1842 to 78, long tenure.
Very long. And he made a great impact on the city of Westminster. He wasn't just preaching, he was really engaged in social welfare, specifically targeting the down and outs, beggars and tramps. He did a lot of work with Westminster Hospital, too.
So that was the model then, doctrine plus social utility.
That was classic Congregationalism, yes. And that model got even more ambitious later, didn't it?
Yeah, I was struck by Richard Westrope, minister from 1896 to 1902. He had what were called advanced socialistic views.
Yes. His attempt was pretty radical for the time. Westrope really tried to set up a genuine people's church.
What did that involve? It sounds like more than just services.
Oh, much more. This wasn't just, tea and biscuits after the service. He ran clubs, set up a labor bureau, actually trying to find people jobs.
A labor bureau, wow.
And even maintained a people's lawyer. The idea was for the church to be this comprehensive social safety net, looking after the whole person, temporal and spiritual needs.
That sounds incredibly complex to manage. A huge institutional undertaking.
It must have been. And the peak of that kind of highly organized structure really came under Campbell Morgan.
Right, 1904 to 1939, just before Lloyd-Jones arrives.
Exactly. Morgan didn't just keep things going, he sort of perfected the system. He restored the chapel's fortunes and created a truly highly organized institutional church.
And the key to that organization, the engine room, was the sisterhood, wasn't it?
Absolutely, the sisterhood. That's a detail that really stands out.
Tell us about them. Who were these women? What did they actually do?
Well, they were a pretty formidable team. We're talking up to 9 full-time, paid, gifted women workers by 1911.
Full-time staff?
Yes. And instantly recognizable, they wore this distinctive navy blue and scarlet uniform.
The uniform really emphasizes how formal and professional their role was.
It does. They weren't just volunteers. They were running the machinery of the church. And their responsibilities, astonishingly broad.
Like what?
Okay, so they managed all of visitation, they led the huge Sunday school operation, handled secretarial work, ran the book stall, and crucially for the local community, they operated a woman's employment register.
So, practical help as well as spiritual.
Immense practical help. Campbell Morgan was really clear about this. He said the results they achieved would have been, quote, impossible without the sisterhood's dedicated full-time work.
It really paints a picture of this massive humming operation.
Yeah.
And wasn't there more besides the sisterhood? Other clubs and things?
Oh, yes. The sources mention a whole raft of other institutional arms. There was a men's slate club that was for thrift and sickness benefit.
Like a mutual aid society.
Exactly. A coal club for saving up for fuel. Even something called the Cripples Parlor.
Right. So Westminster Chapel wasn't just a place for Sunday sermons. It was this bustling local enterprise woven into the social fabric of Westminster.
Held together by this huge, dedicated organizational structure. That is the robust, century-old institution that Martyn Lloyd-Jones walked into as co-pastor in 1939.
And he didn't just tweak it, did he? He came in with, well, you called it a sledgehammer earlier. He was deeply critical of that whole Victorian setup.
Immediately. He saw it as a fundamental spiritual weakness. For him, all that social activity, that institutional side of the gospel, he felt it was just inherited from Victorianism.
Right.
And he believed it had left the church weak and powerless. His solution, basically declare the 19th century a theological wrong turn. He wanted to go back to the 18th century, more focus on pure doctrine revival.
So how did he justify tearing up a century of tradition and doing it so fast? What was the driving principle behind dismantling all that social organization?
Well, the dismantling was incredibly fast. By 1945, so just a few years after he took sole charge, that whole vast structure was effectively gone.
The sisterhood.
Gone. The Lay Preachers Guild. Gone. All the youth movements. Gone.
Wow. What was the rationale?
His argument was brilliantly simple and quite brutal, really. He argued the state and modern hospitals had basically taken over social relief and healing.
Right.
Therefore, the church didn't need to do it anymore. Its primary job had changed.
So he effectively outsourced the caring side and radically redefined the church's mission.
Precisely. He argued the church's main focus had to shift. It needed to be entirely God-centered. That meant prioritizing prayer, preaching, Bible study, the core work of dealing with sin.
And things like aid, healing, clubs.
Demoted, they became merely an incidental function or maybe a byproduct of true spiritual health, not the purpose of the church itself.
I do wonder how the long-term members felt, people who perhaps relied on the sisterhood or the slate club. Suddenly that safety net is just gone. Must have been a shock.
The sources suggest his preaching was just so powerful and his authority so strong that he carried most people with him through that shock. But, his critique wasn't just theological. It went right down to the building itself. He clearly disliked it intensely.
He disliked the architecture. That huge 3,000-seat monument.
Despised it, seems like. It's incredibly personal. He genuinely thought the poor acoustics killed men, meaning it physically strained the voices of preachers like Samuel Martin.
He blamed the building for hurting a preacher's voice.
Yeah, and he called the grand building itself a product of a carnal spirit, a criticism of that nonconformist desire to be respectable. He saw it as worldly compromise, basically.
That just shows the intensity, doesn't it? Everything had to serve the pulpit.
Everything, and that included the music, too. He was fiercely critical of expensive instruments like the highly regarded Henry Willis organ they'd installed back in 1879.
He saw the cost of maintaining the institution as sinful.
Essentially, yes. He looked at projected costs, like maybe £15,000 for future reconstruction, and called it nothing but grievous sin.
£15,000 back then was a fortune.
A huge sum. He was so focused on stripping away any potential distraction from the word that he explicitly said he wanted to abolish choirs altogether.
Choirs.
No choirs, just pure congregational singing. Nothing, absolutely nothing, was allowed to detract focus from the pulpit and the sermon.
So he takes this historically complex, socially embedded institution and just ruthlessly strips it back to one single function, the sermon.
That's it.
And that kind of intense focus must inevitably shape the ministry style, the whole structure.
It absolutely did, the way the ministry operated under Lloyd Jones. Well, it was widely described as a benign dictatorship, or even an autocracy.
Right. The Menachem style was very particular, wasn't it? Shaped by his previous career.
Yes, his medical background, the Harley Street consultant analogy comes up.
Ah, yes. We found that quote where one deacon said Lloyd Jones ran Westminster Chapel as a consultant's practice.
That fits perfectly. Think about it. A top consultant, like on Harley Street, diagnoses the problem and prescribes the treatment. They're the ultimate authority on the case.
Okay.
Lloyd Jones seems to have seen his vestry ministry in exactly that light. He was the chief, diagnosing the spiritual illness sin and prescribing the cure, the gospel, Bible study.
Focused on the diagnosis and the prescription, not the sort of long-term ward management or social club.
Exactly. He was the consultant, but he wasn't running the hospital ward, if you like.
And that approach translated directly into how the church actually functioned day to day. Pastoral care. In that traditional congregational sense, it just vanished, didn't it?
Pretty much, and he was upfront about it. Lloyd Jones would actually warn new members, almost like a disclaimer.
Really?
Yes, saying that because of exceptional circumstances, there was really no such thing as pastoral care at Westminster Chapel in the way people might expect.
Wow.
Membership itself became highly informal, basically left entirely to his personal discretion. For a church that was historically defined by its local community ties and pastoral structures, this was just a completely radical break.
It funnels everything towards him. A single point of focus, maybe a single point of potential failure too. What about assistants? He had people like Ian Murray, Herbert Carson.
He did bring in assistants, yes. But they were very much his personal choices. They weren't necessarily even church members themselves.
Right.
And there was certainly no sense of parity with the senior minister, with the doctor. They might do tasks like hospital visits sometimes, but they weren't guaranteed preaching slots on Sundays or the key Friday nights.
So the whole structure just existed to support his primary ministry, preaching.
That was the engine. Then you have the issue of baptism. For a congregational church, that's a pretty central public ordinance. How did he square that with his focus purely on the sermon?
Good question.
Well, apparently for quite a while he was undecided, which caused some friction. But eventually he landed on sprinkling believing adults.
Rampantly adults, okay.
And he treated the whole issue, the mode, the practice, as what he called a secondary truth. Something outside the absolute core essentials of the faith.
So by calling it secondary, he downplays its public importance.
Exactly. And then he physically removed it from the main event. Baptisms weren't done in the main Sunday service, in front of the huge crowds.
Where were they done?
They were confined to the Institute Hall at a separate church meeting. It effectively privatized the ordinance, removed the public spectacle.
A clear message. Sermon is public, central, essential. Ordinances are private, secondary, incidental.
That seems to be the logic. Yet,
Yeah.
despite all this, the autocracy, the dismantling of the institution, his core strategy works spectacularly well on its own terms, meaning people flock to hear him preach. The attendance figures under Lloyd Jones just soared
Right. You mentioned the numbers earlier. From under 500.
to 1,500, sometimes even more, by the 1950s. And this growth was driven purely by the sermons. People were traveling long distances across London, even from outside London.
It became a destination.
Absolutely. The chapel got this reputation as a kind of theological petrol station, where people went to be filled up on Sundays. It became this incredibly powerful hub for reviving evangelicalism across Britain.
Okay, so let's try and connect these threads as we wrap up. The outcome was undeniably a huge success in terms of his theological influence, reaching thousands. But what was the institutional price paid for that success?
Well, the sources are pretty clear on this. Lloyd Jones absolutely succeeded in transforming Westminster Chapel into this internationally renowned teaching base, no question. But he achieved it by deliberately sacrificing its traditional identity, its congregational roots, its local social ministry, its robust organizational structure, all that was jettisoned.
So in the traditional sense of a local, community-involved church.
In that sense, Westminster Chapel under him could be described as a local church just barely. It was an incredible ministry centered on preaching, but as an institution, it was actually quite fragile, dependent entirely on him.
And the downside of building everything around one towering personality became painfully obvious the moment he stepped down.
Tragically immediate, yes. The ministry was phenomenal, but the utter lack of institutional preparation, of succession planning, it created this inescapable vacuum when he resigned in 1968.
What happened to the numbers then?
The collapse was astonishingly fast. All those people who traveled miles just to hear him preach, they stopped coming.
Right.
Attendance figures just plummeted. Back down below 500 on Sundays by late 1969, the Great Transformation proved to be completely interlocked with the man himself. Succession was almost impossible.
It's a really powerful lesson in, well, institutional fragility, isn't it? So maybe here's a final thought, something provocative for you, the listener, to mull over.
Okay.
When a church's strength, its identity, its draw, rests so heavily, almost entirely, on the powerful personality and the singular message of one leader, what obligation, if any, does that leader have? An obligation to prepare the institution, not just preach the message, but prepare the institution itself to survive their own inevitable departure.
That's a tough question. The transformation under Lloyd Jones was stunning, yes, but its lifespan seems to have been fundamentally tied to his own, not to a resilient organization built to last beyond him.
Something to think about.